Well, hello and welcome to my YouTube channel. My name is Jane and today I'm going to be talking about this beautiful piece of needlepoint that I have recently acquired for my study collection. One of the things that comes up a lot in the forum of the Studio Club is how do we honour the work of previous generations, textile work? What do we do with all of those things that are packed away in drawers or that are slightly damaged? And so much work has gone into them and they are so beautiful, but do we make them into other things? Do we keep them in the drawers? What do we do with them? And I thought that this was a really good example of, some of the pitfalls and some of the things that we can do, and the problems with this particular piece were caused by the way that some of the yarn has been dyed. So I thought there's also a lesson there for our own dye practice. So this is a piece of needlepoint. It's pretty much petit point. It's worked in wools and silk onto a cotton canvas. I bought it on Vinted for £8 last week, and it's got a really interesting history. When I bought it, it had been made up into a cushion with sort of green linen all around it, and this braid here, which you might be able to see, which is an original 19th century braid around it. And the woman that I bought it from had bought it at an antique fair. It had been very expensive. It had looked pretty much pristine. Well, not pristine, like gently worn. But then over time, it had almost started to self-destruct. And all of the stitching went from kind of like round here, and then these big holes started to appear. Now, I think that her analysis of its condition when she got it as a cushion is probably a little bit optimistic, because the whole of the back of it had been stabilised with this. This is iron-on vilene. So clearly it was already having problems. You can see where I've taken it off, it's actually taken some of the fibres. And this corner in particular was missing, and this really here is just a patch of vilene that has been then sewn with modern wool on the top. Right. So here we have, because I've taken it all to bits, I've taken off the canvas, I've taken off most of the vilene, I've taken off the braid, we're back down to basics. And what has happened here? So most of the embroidery is absolutely fine. It's faded, which you would maybe expect, particularly if it's been out. But you can see all of these tiny stitches. There are some pieces where the silk here has gone, but overall it's not bad. But the background is really terrible. All of this black wool has gone from the front, really. And if I turn it over, you can see at the back, it's kind of gone into clumpy lumps. Now, I bought this for what I rather pretentiously call my study collection, which is pieces that I can buy relatively cheaply that give me an insight out into how things were made. So the things that I keep, nicely, it will be in acid-free tissue paper and so on. But I'm not that precious about them, because for me, their value is in showing me how things are made or how things survive, or in this case, what on earth has happened to those wools. So if I take, like here, it comes away so easily. And this is, so that's a thread from the cushion making. But look at how just terrible that is. It no longer looks like wool yarn. It looks more like, I don't know, something that's burnt, really. And this is a problem that lots and lots of needlepoints have if they have a black background. If you can see this in conservation reports from museums. And what has happened is that to get this deep black, right, which is kind of quite a purpley black, the dye would have used a lot of tannin and a lot of iron, probably on a logwood base. There may be other things in there as well. You know, you'd have to go and do proper chemical analysis. But it's known that overuse of tannin and iron cause this issue. Tannin is likely to be something like oak galls, because that gives you a nice clean black, and then iron on the top of it. Maybe with some other dye. As I say, logwood was very popular. And this has been done in a really, really intense way to get this black, because black is a colour that people really, really want. And having so much tannin and so much iron and not rinsing it because you want all of that black to stay there creates acid, and it damages the fibres of the wool. Now, it probably will have damaged the fibres of the wool pretty quickly, but over time, you know, and we're talking 150 years here, I suspect, it has become so acid that not only has it completely ruined the fibre of the wool, turning it into this kind of crumbly, burnt looking stuff, it has started to eat its way through the canvas as well. And that's how the cushion went from looking kind of like passable if you didn't look at it too closely, looking kind of, I don't know, worn in, that whole sort of shabby chic look, to having actual holes in it. At which point the decision was to put it on Vinted, see if somebody else wanted it. So what we have here is an example of what happens if you do it incorrectly. Right. If you are going to use tannin and iron in your dyeing, which will give you darker colours, there are a number of things that you should bear in mind if you do not want your wool fibres to go like this. So what does this tell us about using iron and tannin in your own dye practice? First of all, you're wanting to do it with a really light hand. You want everything to be very controllable. And the easiest way to control that is to control the iron step. So go ahead, dye your stuff, treat it with tannin, and at that point you're absolutely fine, right? When it comes to making up the bowl or the pan for your iron solution, keep it fairly dilute, right? Lots of people like to use kind of like soaked rusted tins in vinegar. You can absolutely do that. It's more difficult to control, but then maybe it's also more dilute. If you're using something like ferrous sulfate, I would say just use at a maximum a teaspoon per 4 litres of water. Okay, that means that you can make it really dilute. It allows you to move your fibres around in it. It allows you to keep an eye on it. Second thing, do not go away from your pan when your yarn when it's in an iron rinse. This is not something to put in and then go away. You'll get black, you know, you leave it for a few days, you'll get black, but it will be completely damaged and will end up doing things like this. So you want to be able to keep an eye on it. As soon as it has got to the colour that you're looking for, take it out and then rinse. Rinse, 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 rinse. When you smell this, it still smells irony, you know. It has that tang to it. So I think as well as having too much iron on it, this has not been properly rinsed. So rinse and rinse and rinse it until you can't smell any iron, and then rinse it some more. And then hopefully you'll get dark colours, probably not black, but very dark colours that will survive. If you think about the other things that I have shown you that are not black but that are maybe browns, they have held up really, really well. It's just when you're wanting to go for this very dark black that you're likely to get issues like this. So the other thing that I wanted to look at in this needlepoint as a sort of part of my study collection point of view is that this design, which is likely to have been worked from a chart, is incredibly fine. You know, it's pretty point, it's somebody's thousands of hours of work. It's really controlled. Now, the work is now faded. You know, these would have been green. These are red, blues, golds, it's probably gold, pink, and so on. But even in its faded state, you can see all of the kind of detail and mouldings. Such precise work. But then when you turn it to the back, and this again is something that comes up in the studio forum a lot about this idea of things being, what do they look like on the back? And certainly I have posted pictures of my embroidery and people have said, yeah, but what does it look like on the back? I think this is really interesting because here we are in the 19th century at a time where correct form was really important, you know, etiquette and so on. Sewing skills for women, really important. And look at the back here, you know, so many of the stitches just go from, look here, from one bit to another. It is really just a jumble. And you can see the original colours. Because this bit has been away from the light, you can see the colours, the pinks and yellows, greens, turquoises, and so on. These all look like they were originally plant dyed to me. And then you have odd bits of silk. Now silk often, you see that again, this piece of silk has just gone into pieces. Silk does naturally decay. Not much you can do about that, but it means that you have got missing stitches here. So my question to myself is, what do I do with this now? And the first thing that I'm going to do is just put it into acid-free tissue and put it into one of my file boxes and have a think. Before I do that, I might hoover it. And to hoover it, what I'll be doing is putting a very fine gauze right the way over the top and then taking like a hoover over the top. So I'm not hoovering the actual fabric, which could damage it, but I'm hoovering a layer on top of it. But once it's hoovered, and I know that there's no kind of problems with it, it's nice and clean, I'm going to put it into tissue and into a box and have a think. But I do think that I will need to do something because it's quite clear from these holes all over the place. Look, there's holes up here as well. This was clearly a big hole at the time that it was bought. The acid in the wool is actually actively eating away at the needlepoint. And if it's left like this, the whole thing will disappear. So my thoughts at the moment are that I will probably cut around all of this black here and then do something with just the coloured bits. And it's going to be, you know, quite a delicate negotiation as to what I keep and what I don't. But I think that I may end up with something that is a little bit like those Elizabethan and Jacobean little cutouts that I've shown in previous videos, you know, where they were deliberately worked so that you could cut them out and put them onto cushions. If I get it like that and it looks good, then I will probably mount it as a picture because I do think it is an amazing design. And I would like to be able to honour the workmanship of somebody who has made this. Because, you know, as we constantly talk about in the studio, you know, what do you do with all of those things that are in drawers that you're hanging on to? What is their role today? Because they're certainly not something you want to throw out. But many of them are not up to any life. And I suspect that when this was made into a cushion, it really shouldn't have been, particularly now that I've taken it apart and I can see that the extreme deterioration had already started. But equally, it's quite clear that the issues with this piece date back to when it was sewn, to the choice of this wool, which had been dyed with so much iron it was decomposing. So more questions, probably more questions than answers with this particular piece, but I hope that you've enjoyed seeing it, and now I shall go and pack it away, hoover it, and then pack it away and have a big think. And I would love to hear in the comments about what you think I should be doing with this particular piece. Bye bye.